I'm sorry, that's just super interesting. All right, okay. So we talked about optimal sporks, and then we're going to talk about this thing. Church, we should have sporks. Church of Quarterology, right? And so this little ridiculousness is 3 divided by 4 is what that piece is. So this still goes on. I was looking up more stuff last night, talking with an old friend about the stuff that's come out more recently. Anyway, let's talk about it. Okay, so this is back in the 1840s. It was thought to have been a published paper. It's sort of not quite. There is a document you can find, and I'll... oh, sad computer. What have I done? Well, while it's thinking, possibly... Okay, so I can escape. That's important. Oh, wow. Okay, I'm just going to crush this thing. So, that just worries me. Force quiz. So the best thing is kill all, but this does work. That's good. Okay. Okay, so what's happened? So this is 1840s. It's a tobacco plantation in France, and they are worried. The people running it are worried about how much to feed people, right? So they think, maybe we should feed the bigger ones more, right? So fair enough, and maybe. So, but how much more? And so they went to a local, and I can't remember the details off the top of my head, but they went to a local. There we go. They went to a local, they found some physicists, and again, this is the 1840s, science is sort of just taking off, and asked them, how should this work, right? If we have someone who's, 1.5 times as heavy or tall or whatever, how do we do this? And so they suggested this exponent of 2/3, right? So the amount of food you should put on their plate in terms of volume should scale as mass of the person to 2/3. And this was this surface area idea, right? So that they kind of you lose heat, and we think of all these individuals as spheres. They're not, but at least isometrically growing shapes. And so the scaling of the surface area should go like mass to the 2/3, right? So it's going to be d minus 1 over d, where d is 3 for the dimension we live in. All right. So this becomes something that people look back on and start to cite and point to and say, oh, this is how you should do this, right? So obviously not a great time to be in a laborer, shall we say? Like, this is not good. Things were pretty bad. And I guess they cared enough to give you food. But anyway, terrible times. All right, so 1883, we have, this is actually a formal paper. It's a German scientist. Rubner experimented with dogs, and this is not, no one's doing anything terrible. It's just sort of looking to see how much oxygen they use and so on, right? So various kind of tests like that. And this is all, again, at resting. This is a resting thing. So if you've got this organism resting, how much does it use to run at that base rate? And I think I added this. Let me just, I threw this back in here. This is a really nice thing. And this is, again, from Pox. I just put it in there. But this is the scaling of the maximum velocity. This is connected to, like, when something's going as fast as it can, what sort of power does it have available to it? And that tends to scale as mass to the 1. This seems to be a rather remarkable result. That's a huge variation, not just in size, but also in type, right? Because we move past, here we have insects and so on. We're moving through different kinds of biological organisms. But there is a discrepancy between, it seems to be between, is that true? No, they're just putting all those plots there. Anyway, pretty amazing. They have running ones and swimming ones. Yeah, awesome. Then there was a paper that came after that that showed that, in fact, the largest things never really get going that fast because it just takes them too long to get going. It's a really nice paper. This is a beautiful thing. So it's good scaling, but once you get up to the biggest ones, they start to wind it up, but they've used up all their energy essentially by the time they never quite get to their maximum speed. So if you juice an elephant, then it could go faster.
Did you kind of see that in the previous
there's a little bit of a downturn. Yeah.
Get more efficient.
Yep. Maybe these points down here.
I feel like the line should go
Yep.
a little bit. This is like one point way out there.
So this is one of these games where there's 22 orders of magnitude here. There are 2, which is not usually that's right. I mean that's a decent range, but for this paper it's like look, amazing. And this is a really beautiful treatment to show this kind of upper limit problem. And usually there's something that happens at the ends that's absolutely fine. They just really explained it beautifully, right? So this is the plot that came with that. Right, so this is how much time it takes. The elephant is getting going with the whole 4 knees thing, which is pretty unusual, and it just doesn't quite, Awesome. Elephants are cool. Okay, so that's an extra piece, but I just want to say, so we're talking about resting metabolism. So looked at dogs, found it made sense. Alpha is again 2/3 for the scaling, right? And so the scaling we're talking about is, this is going to be P. Oh my gosh, why would people? Okay, so I'll deal with that later. And then, okay, not bad. Mass to the 2/3 was this idea, but this is alpha, right? This is early on. So all right, let's leave it as the who knows what's going on business alpha, right? Okay. But basal metabolism as a function of mass. So then in the 30s, I guess we're okay with humans by this point, but people are worried about livestock, right? So they want to know how much to feed livestock, based again on size. Things are becoming more efficient. Eventually we get to McDonald's where all the potatoes will have to be the same shape and so on. But people forever have been trying to make agriculture and animal industries work better and better. So this is sort of part of all of that. And they found a bit of a variation. So this is work by Brody, which is often pointed back to Benedict as well as a different paper, where they find a higher exponent, it's 0.73. So it seems like organisms are running a bit hotter, right, than you would think. What you need to keep a machine going, this biological machine going, seems to scale a little bit faster than what you need to just keep it balancing radiated heat. And this is here because they did some funny things in this data set. So Brody, for example, maybe has 100 animals, but there are a lot of sheep and a lot of rats and all sorts of things. And some of the data in these points is actually generated from a formula, and then it's regressed. It's really a mess. It's really kind of horrible. It's really horrible when you realize what they've done. It's fine. It's a mess. Everyone's doing messy things. But this is a serious business because a lot of food goes into livestock. Nowadays, dog food people are worried about this, right? Dog food companies and cat food companies, because they think about this, but also, say, medicine, right? So if you have something that works for a mouse, how do you scale that up for a human? That's a difficult problem, right? You don't just do it. It's not just weight divided by weight. If there's some sort of scaling in there, you'd really like to understand it. So this bit of hay here, this photo roll, is because you can see Benedict just says they went to a zoo and got hold of an elephant and tried to measure how much energy the elephant was using. I can't remember what method he used, but because it was eating and carrying on, and they couldn't stop it from doing that, because they would actually starve animals to kind of get them to sleep a bit. So I mean, because they needed to be resting / starving. You just sort of see it in the text. It's like, we just deducted 10% from the thing just to sort of account for that, So it's pretty rough, is what I'm trying to say there.
For the animals or for the calculation?
It's rough for everyone. It's rough for us. It's rough for them. Animals, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I grew up on a farm. It's not great. It's not a great situation. Well, it depends on the people. All right. Hence Animal Farm. Right, so this is really interesting. People are very invested in this. As I said, it matters. So then there's this very paper that becomes incredibly famous. It appears in 1932, Max Kleiber, and he becomes famous for this. This is, he has a book called The Fire of Life. This is a big deal, right? this is a kind of extraordinary thing. I mean, by this point, we've made engines that do all sorts of things, but we run around doing stuff. That's pretty weird. Anyway, but this is just 13 mammals. It's not 13 species, right, with averages or something. It's like 13 individual, because it's not easy to do. So it's 13 individual organisms. And he ran a regression through this and got 0.76. So straight up regression. We'll talk a little bit about regression. As we've seen, measuring power laws is not for the faint of heart. And I'll show you some stuff that we did a long time, and I still think it's fine. Obviously, I'm talking about many people's work, but Kleiber's law. So it becomes known as Kleiber's law. It's still called that. Here it is, the fire of life. That's 961. Kleiber ends up at Davis, actually, right? He's originally from Germany, I think I have that right, and he ends up at Davis. So let me see what this looks like. Yeah, here it is. This is back when you had to go and find a book and go to a photocopier and photocopy it poorly. So it's this sort of thing, right? I mean, this is where we are. This is 932. So and one thing about this is you can see how much this thing has been looked at, right? And so back in the day, I sort of discovered, so here's Benedict being talked about, and so I discovered this. Like, I would find a reference that seemed important, and you go and find it in a library somewhere. I had to find one in the Harvard Medical Library, and I don't know if it was because I was at MIT, but there was a sort of sense that you had to kind of walk in like this, and they didn't really trust you, and there was someone watching you the whole time. Anyway, went to, you find, how you search through, theoretically, I guess you do, but you just searching through libraries was this thing we would do, and you would have to, match the numbers, find the place, and it's this nice thing, getting closer and closer, and then you find it, and this is a couple of books I'll mention later on, but it's like these 2 little volumes, and you see them, and you see they've just been worn down, right? Like, these things have been pulled off the shelf over and over again. Everything else is pristine around it. So you start to get this sense of this is some thing that, as people are just really into this. There's some big universal truth, amazing thing here that the Druids knew about or whatever. There's some sort of feeling of, what's going on. Anyway, so does he even have a slope in here? Oh yeah, there he does. Yes, it's on its side. This is my bad photocopying. There it is. They just put it on the slide. Yeah. So it looks pretty good. This is so great. Look at this. It's just handwritten, right? Log M, calories. And that looks pretty good for a straight line, but we'll talk about this. So it turns out, and what I'm going to tell you, is at least for mammals, there seems to be a break in scaling. I mean, there's just not enough data here to be sure of anything. But yeah, a couple of birds. Oh, he's got birds in here too. I forgot about that. So this is a mixture of birds and mammals. Wow. Amazing. Okay. So this is this paper. This is the core of where this whole 3/4 thing comes from. And it's it's a lengthy paper. Eventually there's a book, tables, so much fun. Wow, this is just terribly done by me. Wow, so great. Anyway, just really enjoyable. Slide rule. So why is there a slide rule? The slide rule is there because at this point they're starting to think it's not 2/3, it's something a bit higher than that, and we want people to be able to actually calculate things. The thing people have handy for doing somewhat more complicated things at that point is a slide rule, and if you're doing powers, you don't want to use 4/7 or something. This is not great. 3/4 is it's a Pythagorean ideal. It's the next thing up that's pretty easy to work with. It's a nice fraction, not too bad. But it's 1/12. But it really is about, and this is, he talks about it. He says, the recommendation is to not use 0.76 or 0.73 because I'll show you some, very soon I'll show you some of this. People are really arguing about this. They want a universally accepted number, right? Which is what we would like in science, right? We would like that. But they're pragmatic people, so something strange is going to happen. So first of all, 3/4 because that's easy to use. Okay, rule of thumb. That's fine. It's a bit later. These are the books that I found that are really These are these weird books that I found at Harvard Business School. Wow. And these are just sort of little booklets. It was written by a guy who worked at a hospital. I think he was a doctor. And they're just these little booklets. And now we've got everything. There's insect eggs, bacteria. There's trees in here somewhere. Poikiliotherms, which is cold-blooded organisms, unicellular organisms. So this becomes the reference now for, and so here are the two slopes, right, of 1 and 2/3. This becomes the citation that people use for saying that this is true for not just mammals or birds, it's true for everything, right? If you can somehow go down to unicellular organisms, or you could do it for trees, everything. Okay. But it's really crazy. So this guy does all sorts of odd things, including just presuming it's 3/4 and then fitting the intercept. Like, it's a done deal by this point, right? It's just like, I'm just going to find because that's, and that's sort of interesting, right? I talked about that before with birds and different kinds of mammals. That's sort of an interesting thing. So you can see that's happening in here. This is so great. This one, has it got more good things in it? There they are. And he's just reproducing data, right? This guy's like a kind of a fan. He's having a great time. Lizards and snakes and alligators. I mean, just imagine someone has measured the energy usage of an alligator. I mean, or some graduate students were going. But Morris didn't come back. Shut up. Just going, don't ask questions. So that's fun. You can go and look through these things because they're sort of very interesting artifacts to me. Okay, so this, and if you read through, as I said, assumes 3/4 is true. Did a lot of stuff with mold. This is a mold with a very bad name. A lot of people spend a lot of time studying slime mold because it does really interesting things, but it's just sort of like, it's not a charismatic organism. That's a problem with slime mold. It's super interesting, make lots of shapes, but it just doesn't have the cell. Anyway, yeah.